Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Opinion Boss. And with me in the house, I have actually the former advisor to the Romania and Moldovan Prime Minister, and he's right here with me, who happens to be a global analyst, a trainer on communication, at the same time on political issues and so on. So he is right here with me. His name is actually Randu Magdi. Sorry. He would be the one to actually introduce himself in a formal way, so that many of us can actually understand his own who he is, and at the same time what he does. Welcome, Mr. Ragdu Magdim. Thanks so much. I really feel honored today, to make out this time out of your busy schedules to actually honor this program. It's my great pleasure, and I must say thank you a lot.
Thank you so much, Timothy. And please, for you and for all of you who are watching, it's Radu. My name is Radu Magdin. I'm Romanian. I used to advise several prime ministers in Romania and Moldova. That's Eastern Europe, the place where I was born and raised. For me, it's a pleasure to speak with African friends. I've been going to Africa quite a lot in the past 2 years. I've been visiting several countries. I'm interested in Africa's development, in Africa's dreams, aspirations, and plans. And I hope to contribute via this conversation to perhaps a wider debate on topics that may be of interest to several of you. Thank you once again, Timothy, for the invitation, and I'm very happy to be here. One more thing to put on your radar: I'm also coming from a country who, although is coming from Eastern Europe, has had both a rough past. We have seen a communist past, which was difficult for us in terms of living anonymously, and we have also seen 3 decades of transition. And we managed to go from being very poor in the 90s to become more prosperous, to become better as members of the EU and NATO. So I'm very happy to share part of this experience with modesty, with humbleness, because I always understand that countries are different, realities are different, continents are different. But I'm also very, very interested in Nigeria and Africa as a whole. So thank you once again.
Thank you so much. I must say thank you for your time with us. And without wasting time, actually today we'll be talking on the subject which I titled African Governments and the Political System, which have to do with the role of the youth, the civil servant in the society, and even the business owners. In this post-corona era, let's say this is the new era after the coronavirus issues, the crisis that took place across the world. And even if in some certain countries, they still having most of these difficulties at even in this level, we're talking about these issues. And Radu is right here with us. He will be giving us some figures, some factors, some things that we actually need to understand, and the role that these different sectors in terms of the youths in the society, how can they change the new, how can they change the difficulties that such country actually engaged in during the coronavirus issues. And don't forget, we actually will be focusing on Africa. In the same time, we can also have some kind of comparison to maybe here in the Western world, like Europeans and other places, as long as being able to evaluate from the two sides to know what and how things should be done after this in this post-corona era. So we start wasting time because our topic still remain today. Let me just try to. Okay, this is actually our topic today, which is the social, economic, and political growth, yeah, in this post-corona crisis. So this brings our question to our time to the next question, which have to do with how would you define a social, economic, and political growth? Thank you, Mr. Radu.
Thank you very much. I'll try to be as concrete as possible and try to also be as simple as possible. Why do I say this? I think that one of the traps of political communications, and I've been doing quite a lot of political communications in my life, and also one of the traps of leadership is the fact that we tend to be too complex. Although I believe that a lot of the audiences to which normally we're communicating are educated or highly educated, I think the essence of communications is to make sure you're being understood by everyone. So, from my perspective, if we were to define growth, I would I would say that all too often, not only in Africa but across the world, in Europe, not only we tend to focus too much on figures, and we don't tend to realize, particularly at the leadership level, the fact that for people it's much more important rather to hear about 8% economic growth in terms of GDP, for example. It's much more important if I see 8% more dollars in my pocket, or if I have, let's say, 20 more bucks at the end of the day, or 20 more euros, or depending on each country's revenue, in case I earn more. So I would frame this growth not in terms of a theory, but in terms of better living. Again, I'll be using more simplicity, because I think that we're sometimes caught into this language, complex language, whether we're talking about welfare. Yes, a lot of people understand when we're saying welfare, but not everyone. One of the tests in political communications is how do you communicate so that also your grandma from the village understands you? Or how do you communicate so that um, a child at 12 or 13, an adolescent, like we call them, can fully get you in what you're saying. Socioeconomic growth, from my perspective, means in a country around the world means civilized living, living a decent life. How do you measure this decent life? Well, first of all, I need to be able to pay my bills for me and my family. I need to put food on the table. I need to make sure that I have electricity. You can't really talk about socio-economic growth, or how you say, for example, in terms of human development. Can't really talk about human development if you don't have electricity at home, if you don't have current water, if you don't have your toilet inside the house. So these are the little details that matter, because I don't think it's that. I think sometimes in political speeches it may sound good if you can't deliver concretely for a while, to say, hey, brothers and sisters, yo, people, I managed to bring 10% growth, and we're the leaders of West Africa, or the leaders of ASEAN in Southeast Europe, or whatever, But at the same time, there are people who don't have electricity or current water, or face all kind of shortages. So from my perspective, socioeconomic growth, and I think this is going to be one of the rethings under the current coronavirus, is a combination of decent life, as in securing the basics for your family, and I would say something very important, and this is where COVID-19 and coronavirus comes in. Suddenly, health and health care, so the system that provides health, is important. So I would say that one of the major consequences of coronavirus is the upgrade, the promotion in terms of needs. It becomes a basic need from superior needs. So the fact that I need a good hospital, the fact that I need a good treatment, suddenly is relevant. Why do I say this? Because in a lot of developing countries, and my country has also been a developing country, and we have seen different moments in transition and so on. Whenever somebody is becoming rich in the transition, and we don't yet have a strong middle class, which I believe is the signal of any good living society, if we help a lot of the poor move to the middle class. So until we have this middle class and we have a certain wealth accumulation in transitions, and the majority in Africa is still in transition from this perspective, in development,
Yeah.
the tendency whenever you're becoming richer is to get a little bit isolated. not in a necessarily in a bad sense, but in a good sense for you. Like you're trying a way to get a private insurance and to make sure you have a good private hospital. You try to get your own villa or your better car, you know, you try to get into a better neighborhood, which you may say, hi, hey, it's pretty human, right? Anybody around the world who wants to live better wants to do this. But with this crisis, you realize that it's very hard, honestly, to isolate yourself and to contain things, because by the nature of your work, you know, we have a saying in my country: you're not really rich and you can't really live well in case your neighbor is poor, or in case your neighbor is living a bad life. You know, so I would say this crisis has brought in a way a reality check for us, and I think it has made us more human. You know, in a way, also for those of you who are believers, I would say, has brought us closer also to God, I would say, and has made us understood that separate from our planning and from the confidence that we have in our own forces, some of the things simply happen. I think that in 2020, a lot of us had a lot of plans. I think including the UN and a lot of African governments thought about 2020 like a political ramp for 2030 and meeting up the objectives for the SDGs from the UN, so the Sustainable Development Goals, right? But hey, guess what? It seems that 2020 is not going to be a glorious year. It's going to be a compromised year, or I wouldn't necessarily say the worst year in our lives, but for sure it looks a little bit like a compromised year. So most of our plans will have to adjust. If not, will have to be dropped. So we realize that, again, health is important, that you redefine richness and security. How are you rich? I'm rich if I have me, my family, my friends, my community, if we have a good
Definitely.
hospital, if we have medicine, if we manage to take care of ourselves. Because at the end of the day, I loved one of the quotes from one of the presidents in West Africa. I think it was the president of Ghana. I saw a quote in one of the online magazines I'm following. I'm reading from Africa. It was like, we know how to bring economics back up, but we don't know how to bring people back from the dead. So, and I think this is perfectly true. And although African can have some kind of an element of pride because it's the youngest continent and you have the biggest demography, and yes, you have from this perspective the brightest and future in terms of national energies. You are by this youth, you know, you have this energy coming, and the continent is very dynamic. Even like this, whether we're talking about the young or we're talking about the old, because the old are not necessarily old and isolated, they're our grandmas, they're our parents, you know, and whoever comes as a victim of this crisis is at the end of the day, is all lives matter. You know, I don't mean just movements who spark riots from time in time, like Black Lives Matter, but I would say citizen lives matters. If I were to make a, um, um, a display, a comparison. So health is important, communications is important, and I was stressed that never before has, speaking of socio-economic growth, communication has been so important, because you have to be even more humane than before. You can't just be efficient, you know, because one of the big dilemmas around the world, perhaps less of a dilemma in Africa, but more of a dilemma in what you call the West, or the richer North as compared to the global South, the developing world, has been: what do we do with technology? The so-called Industry 4.0, the so-called fourth industrial revolution, which also involves something which is called automation. So basically, how do we make appeal to robots, and how do we, for the sake of efficiency and for the sake of, let's say, better industrial action, how do we, for example, use better robots or software like artificial intelligence? But this also has a consequence in terms of securing jobs. And I say less Africa than the rest of the world. Why? Because African leaders have a different kind of responsibility than leaders in countries who are getting old. When you're a leader in a country who is getting old, in a way you're trying to, and the country is medium prosperous or pretty prosperous, your duty to society is to make sure you're continuing a level of growth which allows you to have certain revenue and a certain economic traction which delivers to these people. let's say you're 20 million and you're pretty rich, you're looking at population trends, you realize that by 2050, you're going to be 15 million and pretty old. Your mission as a leader of such a country is, how do I make sure these people are satisfied with me? While in a way I'm managing, I wouldn't necessarily say decline, but I would say population winter, to put it even more in a more diplomatic way, and everybody gets what I mean. When you're coming from a young, vibrant African country, the situation is totally different. When you're a leader in Nigeria and you're looking, and 2050 looks like you're doubling your population. When at the end of the century, you're doubling your population again. When you're leaders of Egypt, when you're leaders of Morocco, you're leaders of Tanzania, Ethiopia, and Senegal, and other countries from across the continent, you really have a duty, I would say, to protect your population and invest in your population. And it's not an easy chat that you can have on efficiency, because let's say in case each year you have 2 more million youth coming to the job market, or 5 more million youth, or 10 more million youth that you have to integrate on the job market, on the labor market. Suddenly, all this talk about socio-economic and political growth, from which we started this first question, should not be a statistic, a bullshit kind of, to be very frank, kind of talk. Because for 10 million youth on an important country in demographics, in case I watch TV for 3 months and I hear the leader of the country telling me that robots are very cool, that automation is great, but I don't have a job, I'm going to be patient. 6 months, I may be patient. After 1 year, I'm going to become nervous. Because first of all, I think it's legitimate for me to try to find a job. Of course, there is always competition around the world. There is competition in my country, in your country, in Italy, in the United States, in China, everywhere. There's competition. There is also cooperation, but there's also competition. We don't live in a socialist/communist system in which everybody gets a job. I used to be part of a country who, in a way, at the end of the system, got bankrupted after 40 years. And the idea was everybody gets a job, even a fourth job, but you're getting a job. It did not work. This system did not work. We're not probably going to try it, hopefully not in our lifetime, because we know already, at least as Romanians, that did not work. So we need an economic system. We need a recipe. Like grandma or mom knows how to cook. The same, we need a central banker and a finance minister who knows how to cook in the new coronavirus crisis. It's a crisis. A crisis would have come anyway. For all of us who are reading a lot from across the world, the only question as regards a new crisis was, when would a new crisis would come? Because there were people who were talking about 2021, there were people who were talking about, will a crisis hit financial markets before or after Trump has elections, So we knew that a crisis was going to happen. Crises come every few decades, or every decade from time. It's economic, it's financial, it's cyclical. The problem with this crisis that we're faced with, it's a crisis. I love this quote. It's not my quote. I read it somewhere. It's a crisis of the system of systems in which we're working. Because it's also the way we're doing it is that we, in a majority of crises, we're based in consumption. The problem is, how do you consume if you're stuck in your house? Because all these people who, for example, and I think this is also a problem in Africa, not only in some parts of my country. Some parts of my country are very developed. For example, we're very rich in Bucharest, for example, in the capital, a lot of investment. But we also have sometimes in the countryside or in lower towns, lower level towns, we have, for example, people who are working per day, which means that if you can't move from your house and work for your employer for that day, no food. No money, no food. No work, no money, no food. And I'm sure this is a reality also across the developing world. So I think this is one of the problems. And for these people, you can't come on a speech in front of the nation and say, oh, my fellow African citizens, things are great. And we have great socioeconomic and political growth. For all these people who could not move for 3 months, and basically in the majority of cases were not able, the men and the women who were hardworking people and trying to get their living as before, it's very hard for these people to believe words in case they don't have logistics. in case they're not allowed to work, so we have to, it's not by chance that right now we're starting to redefine everything. So not only we're setting the agenda higher up, like for example we spoke about the importance of health, right, or the importance of being more humane in terms of empathetic in terms of communications, but I would say we're also talking about model redesign, the recipe, the secret sauce that I was mentioning. How do you define success? Because even before, when we talked about the fourth industrial revolution, so the new economic models in sometime in the future, right, 2025, 2030, right, but now we're being forced with this conversation right now because, for example, one of the topics which was under debate was a minimum wage, a guaranteed minimum wage. And this is depending on how you want to see it. It's either something fair, in case people lose their job, the state will have to still give $50 to everybody to make sure that people, particularly in crisis times, they don't become desperate and they still have at least a minimum of food, and or to make sure they have a living. Or if you're looking this from the political perspective, this is something which is in a way a minimum pact for social peace. Because whenever there is crisis, there is also risk for populism. There is also risk, irrespective if people have solutions or not, there will always be people in the opposition, or even sometimes people in power, who will come and say, hey, people in government are totally wrong. We have to burn everything down, and we have to make a new society, and people will believe them, particularly after a few months or a few years, in case they see there are no solutions from power. So this is my final point at this socioeconomic and political growth. The final point is we're starting to rethink, to redesign, to put everything on the table. It used to be simple before, right? You would see, for example, leaders in some countries of Africa, particularly in some countries who delivered well in terms of GDP, they would come on TV and say like, oh, my fellow citizens, be patient. We are good. We are 8%, 10% economic growth. Not everything is perfect, but look, we also have now a bigger hospital, a nicer hospital in the capital. But this is not enough. People will not be patient. Everything is changing. The whole world is in a way in a crisis. So we need a strategic rethink.
Thank you very much. I must really say thank you so much with your, large analysis that you made. Talking about, you actually make a point when you say instead of Black Lives Matter, I think it should be more focus of citizens' life matters, which is now this brings our question to the situation in Africa, like what is happening with my few years here on the Western world. Let me say, particularly here in Europe, and I have also gained an opportunity to travel to different places in Europe. I've actually seen the large gap between an Africa country and at the same time what we have here in Europe. And talking about this citizens' life matters, we have a system that is not actually working the way a system should work. You understand? And sometimes we also have the other side of the youth that, just like what you said now, there are some countries that at this moment they have let me say the age difference, like the age is a kind of in advanced age, a system that have an advanced age, and we have Africa as a continent, or many countries in Africa that actually have that young and energetic age that we have to talk about the youth. Now, they bring my next question, which have to do with actually now we're talking about post-crisis in Africa, and with your experience across the world and looking into Africa political system, and the challenges being faced by the people of Africa every day, because now we're still talking about this. Most of these challenges actually like these daily survivors. How do we survive? We like many countries in Africa, they survive by daily. Like you have to do something in a day to be able to stay on track. And would you say that the corona measurement taken by the African government across various countries was the best? And if not, what do you think that was missing and so on? Thank you.
Thank you so much also for this good questions and comprehensive questions, which allow me to have a wider argument on what's happening. I think, first of all, that what happened in other continents happened in Africa as well. I think that leaders were surprised. They were caught off guard. I think that everybody had a plan, whether we're talking about either economic growth, local markets, elections. It's not by chance that, look, one of the effects of coronavirus has been the postponement of elections, or from this perspective, an increased stress to leaders who are in power because they know they're facing elections. Some of them perhaps they would have been more relaxed for the elections. Now they're thinking, I really must do my job. I really must deliver in case I want for people to renew my mandate. I would say, if I were to make a comparison with the weather behind me, when we started this conversation, it was sunny. It was beautiful. Africa is a continent, with all its problems, like we have problems around the world. Each country has a specific dream, specific dreams, and specific plans, right? Africa as well has African dreams and African plans, also African problems. Now, when we started this conversation, it was sunny. That was life before March. Now it's cloudy, and I could hear the thunders. I would say we are during, let's say, we are during Corona. We see these health issues. Now, in a way, we know we should take cover. This is what we're doing when we see lightnings and stuff. We don't see yet heavy raining. What we don't see right now with African leadership or other leadership across the world, we have a big question, and nobody has the answer yet. For we know that it's going to rain, but we don't know for how long it's going to rain. And this is going to be the drama. Will it rain for 2 years? Will it rain for 5 years? Will it rain for more? We have a saying in Romania, particularly after communist times, we say, no more sacrifice generations. And I think that one of the legitimate dreams for all parents and grandparents and young people across Africa, like in Europe, like in Asia, Latin America, is we struggled so much and we tried to do so much so that what would be a simple family dream, that each generation lives better than the previous one. Like, let's say my mom was pretty poor, but she managed to learn well. She managed to have a good career. She managed to put me into the middle class. Now I'm a better version of the middle class. Now my kid lives better, and so on, right? So this is, let's say, a family dream separate from a national dream as a whole. I would say national dream is, let's say, for the whole of the people to live better, and so on. The leaders are the ones who are supposed to communicate this dream. The problem with this, also with the question, but also with, I would say, with our mindset for the moment, is that we tried to split this time in before Corona and after Corona. If you're looking at the majority of the articles that we're seeing, the conversation is about before and about the after. But my friends, you know what the problem is? We keep talking about post-Corona. Friends, relax in the wrong way. But we are in Corona. We are within Corona, and we're going to stay with Corona. We are amid Corona. So it's beautiful to talk about post-Corona, but don't be in a hurry. We need to prepare the during Corona, because whether we like it or not, we are during Corona for the next few years. I say the next few years. Why? Because even if there is a good vaccine, which is properly tested and so on like this, probably is not going to come before 1 year, a year and a half, right? Yeah. So we are still during Corona. Even like this, I'm not sure that everybody will either have access to the vaccine afterwards, or will want to make a vaccine afterwards. There is also an issue of how do we live in between? How does the economy live? And this is my comparison with the weather. It's starting raining in our economies, and it's going to rain, and it's going to rain. And this is, I think, that the main challenge for the African leaders, like for leaders across the world, is to pray to God and make sure they improve. Why? Because they really need to become master storytellers. Never in our lives, except for in times of war, have we needed more, actual war, have we needed more storytellers, people who, and efficient storytellers. Why do I say this? Somebody who can tell me a story to give me hope, and also feed my patients so that I can go to sleep together with my family for another day with the hope that tomorrow is going to be, if not a better day, at least a day that we will survive and perhaps thrive. And I say efficient storytellers because people will lose patience at a certain moment in time if beyond my story, I don't deliver from time to time something. And I think this combination of, this is the main challenge for African leaders for during Corona. Now, your question also asked what happened not before Corona, but at the starters of this Corona crisis. I think that even the country that in a majority of cases, we across the world, we admire most in terms of development, the United States, even the mighty United States has seen that it has its own vulnerabilities. Even a model which has delivered so much growth and so much prosperity, like the US American capitalist model, has shown the fact that perhaps health has been underinvested, and perhaps in the future one of the lessons is that you don't have to be a socialist, like one of the debates in the American campaign was that Obama, with his Obamacare, or Bernie Sanders is getting us to socialist. But is it as a value? One of the basic questions in Africa
Okay, I guess we sorry. I guess we lost him actually, and he was actually making his points on so many things that have to do with uh, the topic. Don't forget, we're still talking about what can youth do in this post-corona era, and I think this also bring the questions to the floor. If you guys can, if you would like to, at the same time, uh, air your point of view, you are free definitely to do so. And we're quite so sorry, and we hope that he's able to get back with us.
I think we disconnected. I think we disconnected for a few seconds.
Yes,
I think we
yes,
were
yes,
disconnected for
yes,
a few seconds.
yes.
Apologies.
Thank
I
you.
think the Wi-Fi dropped. As you can see, things are not perfect in Europe either, And
Yeah.
I switched now to 4G, so hopefully the 4G is going to be more generous with us. So
Okay, okay.
I know where this stopped because Zoom stopped as well. So I was saying that we have to redefine this new normal, and it starts with what is good, what is right, what is important. So if case, for example, health is good, right, and important, then the new normal means, yes, investment in hospitals. It
Yeah.
means that in between putting some money into, let's say, something and putting money into hospitals, then I need to put some money into hospitals because I care about my people most. And I think that a second thing which is coming as a reality on the menu, on the table of African leaders and of African leaders around the world are two more fields where you should put money. One is education, because whether you like it or not, the process of skilling, reskilling, or the so-called upskilling, so becoming better, right?
Yeah.
For the people of the country, it has to do with education, right? So in case I want to make sure that my country is successful in the new crisis scenario, I need smarter people. I need better people. I need more efficient people, because I can't afford to tell to my people, sorry, for efficiency, we're going to use robots and that's life. We can all go home and watch TV, It doesn't work like that, So I would say like this realization in terms of more important values that health is important leads to a reprioritization on health, but it would also lead to a prioritization on education. What do I do for my young people? How do I get my people better educated? How do I get my youth trained? And the second issue is separate from this training, on a fast track, on a fast forward mode in the next 1, 2, 3, 4 years of crisis. How do I get fast jobs for people? Particularly in countries where I see each year the market, like for example, Nigeria, a few million people coming to Egypt, leaders, other countries, Ethiopia, other countries who are beyond 100 million in Africa, Tanzania, and so on,
Yeah.
countries who have a demographic pressure, leaders have to deliver.
Man,
Again, people will be patient in 2020 because everybody understands it's a really bad year. But starting to Egypt, Ethiopia, Tanzania, and other countries, Congo, and other countries around Africa, will say, hey, I really need to put people to jobs. So, separate from health and education, they will invest in infrastructure. People will be asked to come, and states will try to create jobs by putting men and women to work in infrastructure development.
okay. Thanks so much. We're quite so sorry, though there is still some little problem with the network. We hope that as soon as possible, things can be fixed in the next week. We'll be lucky to have it fixed. So don't forget, we're still talking about the post-corona crisis in Africa, with your experience, which actually Randun actually talked about across the world, and the measurement that the African leaders took during these corona crisis issues. Now, this brings us to the next question, where we talk about the role of the youth for a national development, and what can African youth, do to insist in building a stable economic and political growth in Africa. So this bring us to these other questions, and thank you, Radu.
Thank you too very much. I do a lot of leadership and empowerment training across the world, and it's a pleasure for me to interact with youth from across the world. And I think one of the big chance and the big for Africa is its youth, its energy, its hope, its interconnectivity. And I think we should use this crisis as an advantage, because never before has youth in Africa been so connected. Never before has Africa been able to, I would say, African youth been able to communicate between themselves so easily, and to connect also with knowledge around the world. Not all knowledge is expensive. The internet is full right now also with free courses. And I think that, speaking of role of youth, I would say, my friends, use this wonderful opportunity that suddenly transportation costs and other costs, are no longer an issue, to connect to good quality content. Most of the good content right now, starting with the corona crisis, including conferences, including talks, including all kinds of, let's say, interesting chats with interesting people, is freely available. Search for your passion. Go to YouTube. Google topics which are interested for you. Watch. You have good internet across Africa. One of the things which is good across Africa right now is this digital economy which is on the move. Try to look for opportunity. Opportunity will not come knocking at your door. I'm sorry to say this, but this was valid also for my generation in a country which was less than 20 million people. But even in my generation, at the beginning of 2000s, when I was in my early 20s, now I'm 38, nobody knocked at my door to tell me, oh, Radu, you're so handsome, you're so smart, we want to give you $1,000. It doesn't work like this, my friends. We have to fight. Life is a fight. Career is a fight. I know it's not easy. I know that jobs are not always easily available, but try to, first of all, become better, become skilled, try to look for people who are hiring across the world, not only on your markets. A lot of you speak English, and I think this is a great advantage. Connect, learn, understand. Any kind of foreign language is an advantage. I'll give you an example. Me, I also speak French. In our part of the world, French is less of Eastern Europe French is less spoken than English, like in a lot of other cases. But the fact that I speak fluent French for me is an advantage, because if I, for example, if I go to Senegal, if I go to Morocco, if I go to countries in Africa who also have a competitive advantage. The same for you. You have different competitive, you have a competitive advantage. So I would say, friends, let's try as much as possible to get educated. Try as much as possible to look into the whole opportunities that we have. I switch a little bit the camera. Hopefully it's better for you as well and you can see me better.
Okay. Yeah, because we're still having problem with the network, and we just hope that can be fixed so that everything will just be okay. So it was actually talking about the importance of education in Africa, because when you look at this world today, you look at the Western world. Imagine I've been here in Italy, for example, and at the same time I also had the opportunity to visit different places in Europe. And you talk about education, the government don't joke with it.
I think you should see me now. Is it okay?
No, I still can't see you. Just try. Definitely, we will still wait for you. So the government don't joke with education, and the citizens are also, they take this education something serious. You understand? But now we try to bring into the African perspective.
Perfect.
Okay.
Can you see me now? I think you can see me now. You can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you now, and I can see you.
My apologies. I moved to another corner of the house. As mentioned, it has started heavy raining. So I think the Wi-Fi was a little bit affected. My apologies. As you can see, nobody's perfect and no part of the world is 100% safe in terms of connectivity. Now, having said that, I'm going to restart my idea on education and access. I think you're lucky that you have access to technology. Use this accent. Use this free education, which is available online. Separate of all, think, what do you like? What is your talent? What is your skill? Try to become good or very good into something and pitch for people who are looking for that something. This is very, very important, because nobody's going to come knocking at your door. This is an argument that I wanted to tell you from my own experience. Nobody comes knocking at our door. I think you have a great advantage. I think you have the advantage of demographics. Demographics also means that although I may compete with a lot of other young people, if I'm very good, I will succeed, and more people will be interested in my country, because my country will be a more important market. So this is my final point. You have access, you have education, know what you want. You have that, like Steve Jobs used to say, stay hungry, stay foolish. I would say stay wise, stay hungry for success, but make sure you really pitch a lot of people so that you really don't stay hungry for the rest.
Okay, thank you so much. I really do appreciate. So you can see what he's actually nailing the fundamental facts that is actually the problem of Africa, even right from the lives issues of lives matters that have to do with citizens' lives matters, which should be, and one of these most important factors in terms of citizens' right is actually what we have to do, which have to do with the education, which is one of the fundamental factor in every country. And at the same time, you having the opportunity to actually gain, the opportunity to go to school and so on, you should see it as something very, very important for you, because it will help you to create that that self-building in being able to confront your future challenges and so on. So this is actually what Rondo was talking about. And don't forget our questions or our issues today. The topic today still remain on African government, political system, the role of the youth, civil servants, and at the same time, business owners. What can they play? What role can they play in these post-corona eras? And how can they contribute to national development in Africa as a continent, or even in their various countries. And this now brings our next questions before we go. Don't worry, maybe by in next 15 minutes time, I think we should be through from here. Before we go, this brings our next question to what can Africa as a continent do in order to encourage foreign investors to invest in Africa?
Thank you so much, Timothy, and apologies once again for those technical issues. It's going to be fine. I have behind me, as you can see, a beautiful, let's say, almost tropical rain, this time in my home, Romania. Now, in terms of foreign and direct investment, I would say first of all, what's needed for Africa is, and I love the way you framed the question, is I would say less aid and more investment. I think this is also an issue of African pride, but it's also an issue of refocusing the mind and the needs, because you're starting to already to have a strong generation of local investors. I don't just mean people like Dangote, who of course are a shining example for your societies of what someone can do in terms of service, but I also mean that the future belongs, from my perspective, to the middle class and SMEs. And you can't really have middle class and small and medium enterprises without investment, without seed funding, without an environment which allows this. Now, let me tell you what worked for my country. What worked for my country was, first of all, to have better laws. It worked very well to have more simplified legislation. Whether we like it or not, people are not going to invest too much, despite enormous potential, in countries where laws are too complicated. Why? Because laws which are too complicated either allow for various interpretations, which means that people can go to court too easily and projects get stuck, or too much bureaucracy gives opportunities for corruption. And this is something which investors, they don't necessarily like. So I would say, let's simplify the rules of the game and the money will come in as a first rule. Second of all, I would say, know how to present yourselves. I think there's a lot of talent in Africa. And I think also you have had both the immense blessing and the partial curse of mineral resources. I say this why? Because even in Europe, we say when your country is very rich in terms of minerals, we call this the so-called Dutch disease. So the fact that you may be rich for a while, but you're not being tempted just by being rich, you know, to invest too much in people and the next big thing simply because it gets you cozy. I think this has been an immense blessing, the fact that you're rich in minerals as a continent, but it has also been a partial curse because people who were into power, they were tempted to use power to get a hold of these resources. And second of all, because there was a temptation just to rely on natural resources to make sure this works. Now, the new economy, and I'm not just talking about a crisis economy with COVID, but the new economy for which we're already preparing is a knowledge-based economy. Or if I were to put it in simpler terms, like I have advocated at the beginning, a wise economy, an economy of the smart. So what we need to make sure is to make sure that our kids become smarter, our kids become more educated, that our youth becomes more skilled. It doesn't necessarily mean that we can all become Nobel Prize winners. We are different. We are not the same. We have been endowed with different natural skills and talents. If I'm a natural good singer, I'm not going to necessarily become, you know, the greatest electrician in the world. The purpose is not to totally reset people's destinies, you know, and make sure that just because we need a cleaner, we should switch the engineer to cleaner because that's the job available. Sometimes a life under crisis forces you, in order to feed your family and feed yourself, to do jobs for which you're not necessarily qualified. Like you may consider yourself you're better qualified, but unfortunately, things stand like you have to do a lower job simply because that's the job available. But I would say the future for which we should prepare in the years to come is a future in which we try to become better and better. You know one foreign language, try to learn a second foreign language. Try to learn a third foreign language. you know how to cook, learn also how to, how to do agriculture. Learn also, do a course on how to prevent climate change. Learn how to fight a so complicated expression like climate emergency. You are an engineer, you know part of simple engineering, that's fine. But okay, now let's try to do more complicated engineering. What I mean is the new economy and the crisis economy is something which is, in a way, is going to be stressful, but this is good for the body and also good for our mind. We need to become better. We need to understand we're not necessarily just doing this for the sake of the crisis. We're doing this for ourselves, for our families, for our countries, because otherwise, we are, my friends, we are in a global competition. Even my country, for example, has become a little bit better than the 90s and then the 2000s and then the 2010s. Even my country right now, as part of the club we are a part with, the European Union, we are still cooperating in this club, but we're also competing. For example, one of the biggest catfights in Europe is between countries who say we should use part of EU money for agriculture, or for cohesion. Cohesion is something like development for poorer regions, like it would be a similar equivalent to aid, So countries who are fighting for aid and cohesion, and agriculture, which I would say are economy 1.0, are competing for attention and for EU money, which countries who are saying, no, we should invest in research, we should invest in artificial intelligence, we should invest in electric batteries, we should invest in hydrogen, not in oil and gas. What I'm trying to say is, yes, for example, Nigeria has oil and gas, and it's great that you have oil and gas, but try to use part of the revenue from oil and gas to train part of your people, if not all your people, also in high tech. Try to have a high tech park in Abuja. Try to go for something really smart in Abidjan. Try to go for something really good, in Dakar, across West Africa. Try to focus for a specific niche in energy in Cairo or in Cape Town. All across Africa, try to think not only past and present, but also think of the future. And the future, as all of the people think of the future. Don't try to fill the gap. Use this crisis as an opportunity to go from industry 1.0 or industry 2.0 to industry 4.0. Don't go to industry 3.0, because otherwise the gap in between the rich world and the global south, out of which Africa is part, will continue to be a serious gap.
Definitely. Thanks so much, man. I must say, I learned a lot today. Is a great opportunity. I must say, thanks so much. You actually talk about this. Not just on the You understand that Africa as a continent is a continent that is rich when you talk about natural resources, and you advise us in a capacity building in terms of human capacity building, human resources, to invest more in human resources instead of natural resources, which you also make us understand that, for example, if you understand one thing, you should push further to learn the second thing. I guess this is actually this is actually one of the fundamental factors that is actually affecting Africa or Africans today. Let me use Nigeria as a case study, because sometimes when they understand A, they don't really see it necessary to learn what is B, or what B have to say, or what B is all about. Like, for example, so they just focus on the A, and they just feel like by the time the A crash, automatically they turn back to zero. Let me use, for example, politicians in Nigeria as a case study. Like, for example, imagine just younger upcoming politicians, for example, who don't even hold any office, anything. But as long as they just decide to say, I want to be politician, they become, I don't know, national liability. Like, they just stay at home without doing one or two things that would have, okay, this is my profession, why I'm also engaging in political activities, but they just feel like I'm not a national property, And the same time, even with the youths also, who happens to gain one or two opportunity to have their opportunity, you know, their green light in the certain sectors, they just like go on without learning what the other sectors could have bring in, or just for future reasons. And lastly, you also made mention of, for example, let's talk about the language, which actually today this is actually going to the Nigerians that lives in diaspora, because some of us just feel that we are here, we don't belong here. I speak English, the people ought to speak what I understand, not what they understand. Now you can hear from him. When you understand one thing, push on with the other thing. Push on. At the end of the day, these are factors, these are things, these are instruments, these are knowledge that at the end of the day, you benefit from it. Not that you're doing it for the people, actually, not that you're doing it for the country where you live. At the end of the day, most of these things might actually be something that will be useful for you in the future. For example, I normally make people to understand, for example, you live in Italy and you feel that, come on, I'm a graduate in Nigeria. Like, for example, I learned English, I've studied on my year. Why should I learn, or what is the necessity for me to learn Italian language, like, for example? And at the same time, tomorrow you keep complaining that the country doesn't give you that opportunity that you need to succeed, for example. And and the other way around, you feel that you at the end of the day you have to go to UK. But going to UK, with you going there, being an Italian speaking person or a French speaking person, automatically going to UK, you have a double advantage in living in UK, because at the end of the day, there are so many sectors now. We live in global world, we live with globalization, more development, and so on. So most of languages are some of the fundamental things, some of the fundamental keys these days in pushing the world and in moving ahead. Without wasting time, I can say I'm so sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear perfectly.
Okay, perfect. Now, before we go to the closing of the day, I just want to, because somebody actually asked a question from Gabriel Nwangwe, who said, can they ask your guest if he thinks, okay, if you think that the environment that we have in Africa gives the youth the chance or the opportunity to truly strive or become a major player in the economical globalization of Africa continent?
It will not be, this will be a country by country approach. Let me tell you why. I think that it's very hard to put the whole continent in one direction. From my perspective, I think it's a mistake, for example, to delay your free trade agreement for the whole continent. I think that ever more in crisis, you have to stick together and you have to trade even more and you have to do more things together. And for example, I saw several news that some of the people said, like, or leaders said, like, oh, okay, now the crisis has started, we're going to delay. I think the biggest trap we all face in fulfilling our dreams is delay. In my experience as an entrepreneur, as a consultant, each time there was a delay, a delay from my perspective is the biggest mistake. Well, life goes on, my friends, and life goes on without us, you know? So I would say it's really important to proceed with plans. That's why I'm saying I'm not sure that yet the continent is so mature as to understand all of the countries, 50 plus, to understand that you are in the same boat and you really have to go together. I think that per region, you understand. I think that, for example, ECOWAS understands. I think that more and more you understand in your different region that you have common challenges. But I'm not sure that as a continent, because it's a really big continent, from my perspective, it's also the most diverse, the most multicultural continent we have in the world. So it's hard to see. That's why I'm saying the drivers will be national and regional. And I think that in each region, we're going to have a competition, a good competition from my perspective, for leadership, economic leadership, ideas leadership, and I would say for mid-power status. Because we talk a lot around the world right now about great power competition. But what we fail to talk about is regional competition and medium power competition. So for example, in my region in Eastern Europe, okay, we have great power competition. And for example, we're a part of the EU, and you could say that global Europe is a great power competition player. And we also have Russia in Eastern Europe, right? We also talk sometimes about US versus China and the effects in our region. But for example, we also have regional competition. So for example, Turkey is a present player in our region, particularly in the Western Balkans. You know, for example, in West Africa, you have some countries who are born, from my perspective, with the blood of regional leaders. Like for example, Nigeria, having so many people, you are the demographic king of the region. But from my perspective, looking at the region, if you're looking at economic growth competition, formal economic growth competition, I think this competition is more in between Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana. And if you're looking at models in the region, it's more in between Senegal and Ghana. So as you can see, things are more nuanced. You can be a very big country, but in case you're busy with a lot of local problems, then even if you are the king, you're a busy king. And when the king is busy, the princes in the region, they have their own issues. So I'm trying to say,
no, we can't hear you. Yeah, with sorry, you know, because it's raining actually. No. No, we can't hear him, so we're quite so sorry. We're quite so sorry about that. So let's wait and see.
It's not about leadership and storytelling. Yes, storytelling. The day your president has to be a good size, young.
Okay, go on. We can hear you now. Oh, we lost him. We quite so sorry for the whole thing. And we're sorry, you know, it's raining today, so sometimes it's like that when it's raining. And if you're watching us for the first time, don't forget to follow us on this page. And on Wednesday, actually, Wednesday I will be having a guest all the way from Newcastle, in England, and he will be discussing.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Apologies, I was just making. I was saying that essentially, I don't believe in country destiny. I don't believe that some countries are more blessed than the others. I believe that we make our own destiny. This destiny is helped by our leaders. Normally, our destiny is also helped by the qualities we have. So, for example, we Romanians, we have a lot of humor, and we like to mock ourselves. We have, for example, a joke which says that God has given Romania everything, has given us seaside, has given us mountains, has given us rivers and resources. But God also has a sense of humor, because God, in compensation, has given us Romanians, you know? So,
well, we're sorry, guys. We're sorry for.
So speaking of this, national resources, but you also have your biggest resource. That's great. In case we don't, then we should.
Okay. Well, we due to the thanks so much. I must really appreciate your contribution today. Is really massive and it's so great. So we without wasting time, let's just go to your advice to the listeners out there, which has to do with Africans, Europeans. You know, we're still talking about this collaboration, because even I noticed during the coronavirus, the European Union actually played a big role. Also, Nigeria was actually the second country that the European Union supported. with the sum of 50 million euros. So that was actually 50 million pounds. That was actually a lot of money. And we're still talking about hoping to have further collaborations in terms of investment between the European countries and Africa as a continent as well. So what is your advice for the listeners, particularly the youth, in terms of leadership building and human capacity building? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, I was saying before, what is your last message for the listeners out there in terms of human capacity building, in terms of leadership skills, in terms of self-belief, let's put it. So what is your message?
I would say very shortly, friends, tough times are coming. I know you have already seen tough times in your lives. We did not ask for this, but it's going to be a tough decade, not just 1 or 2 or 3 years. We can win this decade for us, for our families. We can become better, to work a lot.
We're so sorry. Okay, thank you guys. As we were saying before, on Wednesday, 10 p.m. on Wednesday, we'll be talking about matters arising, issues facing Africa in general. And at the same time, I'll be having a guest from Newcastle in England. And on Saturday, 7 p.m., this Saturday, I'll be having a guest who happens to be an author, and he wrote a book on the racism and so on. It will be joining us from Belgium, from Brussels. So let me leave. Let me have your word before we go. Okay, now I can see you
So
and I can hear
I
you.
don't know when I got interrupted last time, but the good news, friends, is that I can confirm that I have a lot of a storm around here. So as you can see, it's true what I'm saying. It's a blessed day for us. We say in Romania that when it rains, we're going to be very lucky.
Yeah.
So the good news is we are connected technologically. There are a lot of opportunities in the new economy for those of us who are going to be searching the internet for opportunity, who are going to become more educated, and who are going to connect with interesting people. Let us do this, because this is the only way forward. Not only in isolation, but also after we're going to be able to breach this isolation. So thank you so much, and let us grow together.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate your time with us, and we do hope to have you next time, probably to talk more on the leadership skills and youth, the importance of youth involvement, the role that they can play in being able to render that self-development, self-accomplishment, in the same time to the national, to that of the national development. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate. Do hope to have you next time, and thanks to our listeners out there. Thanks for the time that you spent with us. We do hope to have you back again 10 p.m. on Wednesday, and Saturday 7 p.m. on Saturday. Thank you so much, and do have a great day. Thank you, Radu.
Thank you so much once again, and apologies to all of you friends for sometimes missing the connection.
Yeah, it's all right. Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.